Of course, our correspondent, Sherwin Bryce-Pease, is monitoring all those developments, and we will bring you the latest in terms of what was said in that address by Lavrov, but also continue then to speak about a number of issues that were earlier said in as far as Hezbollah is concerned. Well, we speak now to Sherwin Bryce-Pease as the news of the death, of course, of Hezbollah's long-standing leader, Hassan Nasrallah, is being digested. The United Nations Security Council, of course, meeting last night on the broader Palestinian question. Sherwin, a very good evening to you, and thank you so much for your time. Of course, you've been listening to a range of developments in as far as this is concerned. Let's now talk about, the reaction and so on in as far as Hezbollah is concerned. I mean, has there been a reaction specifically where you are, at the United Nations and the U.S. government to the assassination, of course, of the Hezbollah leaders? Just share with us what you are hearing from that region, but also more globally.
Yeah, so we had not heard, Unati, a specific reaction from the White House after the confirmation from Hezbollah that their leader was killed, Hassan Nasrallah, of course, the long-standing leader of Hezbollah that was assassinated by the IDF, of course, also following in the wake of the former Hezbollah leader some 30 years ago that was also assassinated by Israel in 1992. I can tell you what we've heard from the White House is the following from President Biden. He was asked by reporters as to whether he supported this move by Israel. He said they were not privy to the Israeli action. They were not aware of it before the time. He asked if he now supported the action against Nasrallah. He said he didn't have enough information. They were looking at it. So the United States saying we did not know here. And, interestingly, Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, referring to those pages that exploded in Lebanon, targeting a number of Hezbollah fighters. Of course, the impacts far wider than those militants. Of course, a lot of civilians were also injured. And he, of course, as you mentioned, said that there's no way the United States didn't know, even though the United States continues to deny that it had information in that regard. But we can only go on what the United States is saying, and they are saying that they did not know. I will also refer you to what President Ramaphosa told me earlier this week when he was in New York, when I asked him about the escalation we are seeing now across Israel's northern border, Lebanon's southern border. And he said this: we're in a very dangerous territory, calling on the United States to make an intervention, right? There's a recognition here that the UN Security Council is simply not set up based on its 1945 formula to address this because of that veto and because of the long-standing support that Israel enjoys from countries like the United States. And so, the focus very much on what the US can do here as opposed to what the UN Security Council, whose mandate essentially is the maintenance of international peace and security, and is simply failing in this regard. He said the following: we're in very dangerous territory, did President Ramaphosa, calling on the US to make an intervention. We could be facing a great calamity where many other countries could intervene, and you could have a world war quite easily. Of course, as you correctly mentioned, the UN Security Council met on the humanitarian situation in Gaza last night. But as you can well imagine, the situation that was developing in Lebanon, in Beirut, with that strike that on the Hezbollah headquarters that not only killed the Hezbollah leader, but a number of commanders, including a commander from the Iran Revolutionary Guard. This was some of the narrative emanating from the Security Council, from the UN Secretary-General, the Israeli ambassador, and also the Jordanian ambassador speaking on behalf of Arab ministers who were in the room. Let's take a listen.
War in Lebanon could lead to further escalation involving outside powers. I fully support the proposal for a temporary ceasefire, allowing for the delivery of humanitarian relief and paving the way for the resumption of serious negotiations for a durable peace across the blue line. We need this ceasefire now. We cannot afford endless negotiations as we have on Gaza.
While we are interested in a diplomatic solution, we will take all necessary measures to ensure the safe return of the 70,000 internal refugees to their homes. It is time to hold Iran and its proxy accountable and take decisive action. We have a mission to eliminate terror wherever it arises, in Beirut, in Jenin, in Gaza, and we will not stop until our citizens are safe.
You have a deadlock in Gaza because the Israeli Prime Minister aborted the exchange deal. You have an escalation in Lebanon because he sees, he only understands that the language of war. He hasn't listened to the international community. He didn't listen to his allies. So he launched war in Lebanon. And now this government is trying to escalate on the West Bank. If that happens, that is when the threat of regional war will become the more real, because the symbolism and the importance of the holy sites is across the Arab and Muslim world and will reverberate across.
Ayman Safadi, the Jordanian foreign minister there, talking about the escalation that will likely emerge now from what we are seeing, the developments we are seeing across Israel's northern border. I will also just end on this point, Unati. Yesterday, of course, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was in the UN General Assembly. He's now back in Israel, but before he left, he said this to the GA. I have a message for the tyrants of Tehran. If you strike us, we will strike you. There is no place in Iran that the long arm of Israel cannot reach, and that's true of the entire Middle East. He also said Israel must defeat Hezbollah in Lebanon. So while the Israelis are saying they are open to a diplomatic solution here, the narrative we're hearing from their leaders is that they're going after Hezbollah because they have no choice anymore.
And some powerful statements there by the Jordanian leader, Sherwin, of course. But let's touch then on, these calls for ceasefire. I mean, we know that the United States and France, backed by several countries and the EU, indicated earlier that, that they were pushing for a 21-day ceasefire that would allow diplomacy to find an off-ramp in Lebanon. Are we correct then to suggest that those efforts have now stalled? I mean, what's the latest there?
Well, the official word is that those talks continue, but you are quite right? And what's the most recent example? The negotiations in Gaza. We have now been talking for months. The UN Security Council even endorsed Joe Biden's peace plan for a ceasefire and a hostage exchange in Gaza. But of course, that has come to naught. And we've been talking about that for months now. The imminent and anticipation and the expectation around a ceasefire deal that could bring some reprieve and relief to the long-suffering people, the 1.8 million to almost 2 million people in Gaza that have been moved from pillar to post with nowhere really to go in terms of, the likelihood of them even being able to return home. So that really informs us and educates us about what might happen now in terms of this talk about a ceasefire between Hezbollah and Israel in Lebanon. The initial sentiment we got from the White House was that this was imminent. They had already had Netanyahu on board. But when he landed here in New York, the tune had changed, that they were now going to go and pursue Hezbollah. You then saw the strike in Beirut. So it's anybody's guess as to how this matter will end. But the Gaza example teaches us that as much as they talk about a possible ceasefire and an imminent ceasefire, that might not be the case necessarily, given the actions we're seeing from the IDF in Lebanon, but also the threats we're hearing from Netanyahu as it pertains to Tehran, which, as you know, is a big supporter of Hezbollah in Lebanon.
Sherwin, let's leave it there for now. But thank you so much for that comprehensive update then in what is transpiring, of course, in the Middle East. Of course, concerns all around in terms of just that escalating to the greater region.